This is the Debunking Economics Podcast with Steve Keen and Phil Dobbie.
The Archives.
Episode 180. The Opportunity Cost Fallacy.
In this last Debunking Economics podcast before Christmas, we ignore the elephant in the room. We won't talk about politics in Britain. Instead, it's back to the economics textbooks. Chapter 1, one of the basics of traditional economic thinking, the concept of opportunity cost, the idea that with limited resources, you can't do everything, so you need to consider the cost of doing something versus doing something else. As a basic principle, it sounds difficult to argue against, doesn't it? But that doesn't mean we won't. It's the Debunking Economics Podcast with Professor Steve Keen. I'm Phil Dobbie. Welcome along. We all know the basic idea of opportunity cost. Every decision you make is at the expense of another. You marry your partner, for example, at the expense of not marrying anyone else, at least in the short term. You spend money on something, you can't spend that money on something else. So, Steve, I can see this working in a business setting, sort of. If I invest in option A, I get a better return than investing in option B, supposedly. I mean, but we also hear politicians talking about it. We spend on education at the expense of not spending more on health, for example. Does it have to be an either-or question in every aspect of the economy?
No, and this is one of the reasons that opportunity cost is one of these things which neoclassical economists, if you put them in a corner and say what's something economics has contributed to understanding that is non-obvious, they'll come up with either the theory of comparative advantage or opportunity cost. And I'm afraid I regard both of them as malarkey when you try to apply them to an overall national economy. But they appeal, the reason they get into people's psyche is they make sense at the individual level. And this is what then people extrapolate from the individual to what happens to the collective, and I'm sorry, the extrapolation breaks down the concept.
Well, it gets complicated as well pretty quickly, doesn't it? Even if you look at that personal level. So say you're having a conversation with the family. What are we going to do today, kids? Are we going to do A or B? And then someone, and you feel like that's you can look at the pros and cons of that until someone comes along with options C, D, and E. And then it gets so bloody complicated, you end up going nowhere and doing nothing.
Yeah. But the fundamental argument, I've seen this with, in a book by Arjo Klama, a conversation with economists, where he was talking to somebody who's responsible for the whole rational expectations so-called revolution. I call it devolution. But that economist was using as an argument if his wife that they should hire a gardener to mow the lawn rather than him, because his opportunity cost, if he was actually working in economic theory, then that he's earning, let's say he's making $100 an hour out of that, in a highly regarded non-mainstream economist. But if he was out in the garden, he'd only be earning, he could hire somebody for say $15. Let's say $10 an hour. Yeah. So the opportunity cost of him was $90 an hour, and it's far better if he stayed inside working in the economic theory. And the Arjo Klama made the mistake of interviewing his wife about that observation. He said he doesn't do economic theory. He sits and watch the football game.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So it is one of these false equivalences that we use 100% of our time in a productive way, and therefore if you have that situation, you're better off,
I'm on his side, though. Perhaps he needed to rest so that his brain is more fine-tuned. So when he does do the work, he does better work, perhaps. That's the argument I'd be using anyway.
Unfortunately,
still working on that because we've
so I don't swallow that one.
Yeah, we've also got. I'm working on this one because we've just got a new house. It's got a lawn, and I know I'm going to have to mow it unless I get someone else to do it. And so I'm still working on the argument. So that one's not going to work clearly. But I mean, if we go back to the basics of all of this, though, it's the foundation of economics, isn't it? That economics is all about the scarcity of resources, and resources obviously are finite. There's a certain amount of, if we go back to the source of it all, there's only a certain amount of power we can get from the sun. How we tap that energy, we might be getting better at it, but it's still a finite resource, and that is the fundamental definition of economics, isn't it? Being economical with what we've got.
What it's done is completely take attention away from the important stuff, because opportunity cost fundamentally applies to what you currently have. And that's you currently have 24 hours in a day. You're not going to have more than that. or less. So you've got to allocate them, and there's a question of how you allocate. And if with existing resources, you have existing resources, you can allocate the particular processes. There are some which give you more output than others, so your best thing is to allocate the resources to those specific uses right now. But what actually has meant we're harnessing more of that energy coming from the sun, or more of the energy the sun has left behind 65 million years ago in the form of black stuff underground, that is investment. That is changing the resources with which you work. And so economic, with its opportunity cost focus, has focuses upon specialization and using existing resources more efficiently. That is not what gives you growth. That is what that's the afterthought. That what gives you growth is developing new ways to do things and changing what you're currently doing and developing an entirely new entry into that range of current possibilities. So I see opportunity cost as part of the fixation economists have on specialization when they should have a fixation upon investment and development.
Right. So there is my answer. When my wife says, are you going to mow the lawn because you're not going to pay for a gardener? I can say, no, let's pay for a gardener while I work on inventing something that will enable the lawn to mow itself.
And that's the investment answer.
And then I just watch the TV.
I mean, that's going to happen. I mean, we've got one of those vacuum cleaners that that runs around the floor, vacuuming it, and that's going to happen over time. And that is the real sign of development in capitalism over time has got bugger all to do with opportunity cost. Well, it's innovation taking a risk and stuff that's going to fail that is an essential part of capitalism succeeding.
So when we think of opportunity cost, I mean, when you look at examples, now I was thinking, okay, I'll just look at just to Google opportunity cost and see how other people are defining it. And almost always, even if you look at economics lectures, it's almost always that example of, a personal decision. You do this at the expense of doing something else. Where is it used in economics? Where do economists, mainstream economists, use it as a useful working, or not useful, but how do they see it as being useful in the work they do?
It really, unfortunately, is the organizing principle of their brains. And that is why they obsess about specialization and efficiency rather than talking about innovation and development over time. And it's to me, it's one of those distorting fundamental visions they have. So if we go back to you mentioned the definition of economics being about scarcity. I haven't got the Lionel Robbins quote right in front of me, but Lionel Robbins, who was actually an Austrian economist, not a neoclassical, he invented the definition of economics as a science that studies the allocation of scarce resources, the satisfaction of unlimited wants using scarce resources that have alternative uses. Now, I'm emphasizing the final part of the phrase: scarce resources that have alternative uses. Okay. Can you tell me what alternative use you can put a steel mill to? Can you, for example, make your coffee with a blast furnace?
No. I could knock it all down and build a hotel. But okay.
This is the thing. We create specific machinery for specific purpose that they do not have a function elsewhere apart from that industry. Yeah. And this whole opportunity cost implies, I can go and allocate my time to something else. Well, as a human being, yes, you can. You can mow the lawn. You can record a podcast. You can even tinker to see if you can make a self-driving lawnmower. But as an economy and an industry, once you build up a specific type of machinery, then it doesn't have any other alternative. There is no opportunity alternative for a blast furnace. Once you've got it, it's solid, right, and it has only that usage. And this again is one of those distorting elements.
But at some point you said, what are we going to do with all this steel, though? Are we going to build a blast furnace, or are we going to build a skyscraper and fill it full of office people? I guess So what you're talking about is the consequences of a decision made in the past, and I guess that's the issue, isn't it? That these are not short-term decisions; these are long-term decisions, and you're riddled with what's the word I'm looking for? With history, anyway.
Yeah, history and opportunity cost eliminates history. Okay, opportunity cost. Well, made the decision yesterday, but now you can make an entirely new decision. No, you can't. You are constrained by the past from which you have developed, and that's one. I remember my favorite phrases in Marx, and I'm going to mangle it to some extent, but he says that men make their own history, but not at times and circumstances of their own choosing. and therefore the past reaches out, like I've forgotten the actual expression, the dead hand of the past reaches out to constrain the future. And that takes you away from the whole idea of saying you can make this easy choice, which is what opportunity cost implies. You have to build on what currently exists.
Right.
And to change your direction, you have to change your direction from starting from where you currently are. And opportunity cost, because it implies you can have alternative uses for existing resources, no, you can't. So that is intellectually and philosophically wrong at the aggregate level.
Right, yeah, although, take a point in time, take a look at that blast furnace, and if you think there's not the demand right now, what do? We've got people and we've got money which is being used to fund this operation. The opportunity cost is just closing it down, using that money and those people, and divert it to something which is going to give a better return. Like, look at Australia, for example. Could Australia make more money out of solar panel production instead of just continuing to dig up coal? It continues to dig up coal because it's what it's always been done. It's what they know how to do. They don't know how to do much else, it would seem. So, but if you diverted resources, then you might get a better return.
Oh yeah, but that is not a decision about opportunity cost. That's a decision about future investment directions.
But isn't that what opportunity cost is?
No, opportunity cost is using existing resources, about specialization we currently have, and that is why I think it's such an insidious intellectual concept, because it works at the individual level. It makes sense to say that I've got a choice between mowing the lawn or recording a podcast. In fact, you go off and you do something else. Are you a soccer fan?
Any of it involves Liverpool, and then I don't know a great deal about it. I just enjoy the fact when they win. That's about the extent.
You go for a cycle, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Or go to the pub. Go to the pub with a mate.
Yeah.
Now you're
talking.
Yeah, that's right. That is the opportunity cost perspective on the world, and it makes sense at that level. But when you look at the aggregate level, opportunity cost only applies at the very aggregate. If resources can be moved from one industry to another at no cost, which is not true. Your example of the blast furnace, if you do actually scrap the blast furnace, you're going to get maybe 10% if you're lucky, maybe 5% of its capital value. You've destroyed some of your resources by that process. That is left out of the opportunity cost thinking. But when you get the aggregate level, if there is unemployment, if there's any slack in the economy at all, then there is no opportunity cost. And this is part of even when neoclassicals explain their nonsense to impressionable children at university, they start with what they call a production possibility frontier. And that talks about the amount of output you can produce using labor and capital as your two inputs, and what you draw is if you imagine the vertical axes, and the vertical axis being labor and horizontal being capital, you draw like a 1/4 of an orange as the shape of the production possibility frontier. But once you're fully employed, then you can produce a maximum amount of output, and you can produce, if you have more of one thing, like the vertical axis and horizontal of commodities, goods being produced rather than labor and capital. So you're producing guns and you're producing butter, guns on the vertical, batter on the horizontal axis. The envelope showing what you can produce is like this 1/4 of an orange. And when you're there, if you're going to produce more guns, you must produce less butter. That's your opportunity cost. That's the way they think. But if you're still inside the orange, if you have unallocated resources, if you have unemployment of either labor or capital, and particularly, I'll leave energy out of this discussion. But if you're inside the bubble, then you can go up and produce more guns and more butter. There is no opportunity cost. Now, this is the fallacy of applying at the aggregate level. It only applies in a fully employed economy. Do we live in one? No.
Right. And that's the interesting thing, isn't it? Because obviously economists are all about how do we deliver growth? And yet here they are talking about scarcity. So clearly, if you've got a decision between you've got some money, what do you do, A or B, to satisfy current demand? Or do you do C, which is going to make the number of resources even greater? So you can choose A and B. That's pretty much what you're saying, isn't it?
And C is the important answer.
Yeah.
When you do the choice between A and B, the answer is C. And this is the tragedy. The opportunity cost focus of the A-B choice. The real thing about the economy over time has been pushing the C, moving that envelope out. And neoclassical economics and opportunity cost will tell you bugger all about doing that.
Right. And yet, strangely, we use it, don't we, in the one application I do see of cost-benefit analysis. I've given the answer away, of opportunity cost is when it's used as a cost-benefit analysis. And, I've seen a few of those in my time. I think they're pretty useless, the ones I have seen, mainly because they and this gets back to your favourite thing. It's about predicting the future, isn't it? If we do A, what are going to be the future outcomes? If we do B, what are going to be the outcomes? And invariably, they're wrong because they've...
And this is with the other thing about with the opportunity cost, that implies a false level of certainty about what the options are and what the alternatives are. Now, you can get those false alternative options out if you ignore the future, if you ignore change. And again, opportunity cost is classic on that front. Let's ignore change and decide what to do with our resources. The future is change, guys. So you have to have a focus on which developing new resources, changing what you're doing is the focus, and opportunity cost tells you bugger all about that.
So the cost-benefit analysis for the NBN, for example, in Australia, what's the name of the economist who was very much in favour with the Conservative government, the Liberal government in Australia, who taught at the University of Wollongong and was a writer for the Australian who...
wasn't Ross Garner, was it? No, not Garner.
No. His name will come to me. Anyway, he was involved in the cost-benefit analysis.
Yeah.
And they based like a lot of cost-benefit analysis, for a broadband network, they based it on people's willingness to pay.
Exactly.
So, for example, if we give you much faster speeds, how much more would you be willing to pay for that than you would be prepared to pay for what you're getting now? And of course, people said not much or nothing at all. Therefore, the business case didn't stack up, and then that sort of made it harder to push more government money into it. And of course, people don't know what they're going to get or what they're going to do with it, and therefore, this idea asking for people to say now what they're prepared to pay for something which they don't understand or know what benefits they're going to derive from it at some point in the future. And yet that was the basis of cost-benefit modelling. So it was using a point in time now to predict something in the future that was pretty nebulous.
Yeah, exactly. And what it always will do is underestimate the benefits because you simply, what's the cost-benefit analysis of employing Einstein as a clerk? I mean, it is leaving out the process of change, and yet that's what defines the societies in which we live. So it's very dangerous. People see it as insightful. In fact, it's one of the foundations of leading the thinking astray.
And this is how governments operate, of course, because they do these cost-benefit analyses. Because the argument is, if we do enough of them, particularly when we're looking at infrastructure, we've only got a certain amount of money allocated. We can decide which infrastructure projects are going to be the best. And you've got to do something. If you believe you can't do them all, how do you determine them? And so a cost-benefit analysis is perhaps the way to do it. That is opportunity cost at work, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, it's opportunity cost at work and misleading it, because you said the opportunity cost of the NBN said don't do it, or do it as cheaply as possible. Since Australia's done it cheaply in an engineering way and very expensively in a financial way, they've got to screw it up telecommunications. It was one of the worst on the planet, certainly the worst for an OECD nation, and therefore the rate of growth of the Australian economy, or the chance for it to develop over time, is massively inhibited. And that's the benefit of cost-benefit analysis. Whoop-de-doo. And again, opportunity cost is a large part of the thinking behind that. But
it is an opportunity cost question, isn't it? So imagine we found a way of doing cost benefit analysis that was accurate, which of course means having a time machine and predicting the future. But if we had a way that could be done, using better modelling, for example, so we're getting more accurate figures back, then that would be an application of an opportunity cost, wouldn't it?
I think I'm going to actually quote Henry Ford here. And Henry Ford said if he'd asked his customers what they wanted, they would have wanted more horses on their carriages. Again, it is just not possible to do that sort of. This is one of the ironic things. The neoclassical economists say all the time about you shouldn't be trying to pick winners, but a huge part of their thinking is actually literally doing that by saying cost-benefit analysis, opportunity cost, et cetera, and they're actually disparaging quite frequently the forces that give us this incredible change over time, and their choices almost always end up being wrong. It's one of the reasons that you're actually in favour of saying let's have entrepreneurs driving capitalism rather than bureaucrats and economists.
Yeah, but you've got to have, and we've talked about this many times, you've got to have government money to help prime the economy sometimes.
That's I'd like them on the side pumping up the money and providing funding things without knowing what the benefit is going to be over the long term, which is where funding education, funding research and things like that is a good way for the government to create money rather than funding wars.
Yeah. But I mean, it also gets to the point, I'm surprised you haven't mentioned this now, where the government's got the choice between A and B, and both are going to deliver growth. They're not quite sure whether A is going to deliver more than B, unless they're going to step into the realm that might have been done by the private sector. Why can't they do A and B? If they're both going to produce growth and they're going to produce some sort of return, whether it's a monetary return or whether it's a longer term return to the economy or the well-being of the population, then they could just borrow more and do both.
Well, then this again comes back to the elasticity of what is seen as constraints, because again, opportunity cost talks about you being constrained and having to make a choice. And that is a huge part of where the focus on government budgets being reduced has come from as well. If you realise that actually it's an elastic system, you can create additional money. Your constraints are actually your physical resources, and whether you create the type of resources you need over time rapidly enough or not, and whether you have the labour you can train rapidly enough or not, those are the issues. So the constraints that exist are rubbery compared to what neoclassical economists and thinking about a budget constraint and then a choice between two known entities. That is not the world in which we live. Right.
So opportunity cost. It sounds like you'd just like to get rid of the whole concept. Rip it out of those pages, out of the textbook.
No, we don't rip it out, because we intend burning the entire textbook.
Yeah, or just put it in a history book. Economic history, please do not use on the front page.
Indeed, please.
So look, I mean, so you've given a few reasons. I mean, one is this idea that it ignores the growth potential. It's looking at something that isn't there. It's putting a scarcity that we don't need to look at. In fact, the opposite, isn't it? When we want growth, we're not looking at scarcity. We want to look at opportunity. That's interesting, isn't it? It's called opportunity cost, but it actually is looking at preventing opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, what can we just don't know. Like, for example, the classic instance of the government taking on something which was had no immediate commercial application whatsoever was the space race. That was all driven by Russia-America competition and a vision of America as a can-do nation rather than a can't-do nation, which is what it's turned into. But that innovation 50 years ago is now turning up on the frontiers of what capitalism is going to be capable of. And there's no way in which you say, well, what's the opportunity cost of the space race?
Yeah.
No, it was additional resources thrown at something which caused massive levels of innovation that over time have transformed the world in which we live. And that should be the focus, not this idea of allocating existing resources between competing ends.
Here's something I read online, which I think sort of encapsulates the two sides of thinking here. Looking at it at a personal level, I know a friend of a friend that eats at expensive restaurants a couple of times a week and takes expensive vacations every year, but she doesn't have much savings at all. If people were more aware of the true opportunity cost of their actions, as well as the fact that they're bound to have long lifespans these days, they would be more compelled to save and invest for the future. So here's a person who is behaving irrationally. She is not looking after her future old age because she's too busy having a good time right now. I know which side I'd be sitting on the fence on that one. I'd be going for the let's have a good time right now and worry about the future later. And there's the thing. Opportunity cost, gets down to that rational decision making, doesn't it? Unfortunately, human beings aren't rational.
And it's also partly the end. If you apply that level of thinking, everybody tries to save money. It's not saving that increases; it's the economy that slows down.
Yes.
Now, of course, we're going to need to slow down the economy at some substance in the near future, courtesy of climate change, which is a totally independent topic from here. But again, the whole focus is actually what leads to stagnation in capitalism, not growth. And this is ironic because neoclassical economists think they're helping out capitalism. No, they're giving us reason to think in ways that cause us to spend less and to stagnate.
But how do we, if we're throwing out opportunity cost, just a final question for you on this then, how do particularly governments, I mean, I think in business it's fairly straightforward, isn't it? Because they know what they're about. They know what their business does. They don't need somebody from a textbook to say, you've got the choice here between A and B. If they reckon it's worth doing both, they'll do both. If they need to, they'll borrow more if they have that opportunity to grow. But in governments where we've got used to this idea of a finite budget, and even if we were to say in bad times governments should spend more, we're still going to put a ceiling on how much they spend, because it's going to be a point where if this is money that's been created, for example, we're going to get problems with inflation. So wherever there will be a ceiling at some point. So governments can only do so many things. How do they determine the best way of doing them?
Yeah, well, I mean, the two macro constraints that matter to me are the balance of payments and the level of unemployment. Right. And of course, I differ with MMT on the constraint of the balance of payments level. But those are the two that I think the government has to have primarily in its mind in deciding how much to spend. Right. But once it's spent, that I would like to have. I'm a fan of a minimal level of bureaucracy and a minimal level of bureaucratic invasion into an ordinary life. But I would like that. I think some of the best ways the government to spend are ways that actually just throw money at blue sky projects, which is what the Apollo moonshot was, the classic blue sky project, which paid enormous payoffs. You couldn't imagine the world without that just decision by Kennedy to throw this America into the space race. So there's blue sky stuff and basics, education, health. Transport infrastructure, those sorts of things.
But you want to have a rationale for all of those, wouldn't you? Whether as to how they're going to help employment and that balance of trade question. If they're your two measures, would you just you say everything? How directly or indirectly, how are you going to contribute to these?
Yeah, the fundamental ones were those two constraints, and then apart from that, find a way of creating government money and pumping into the economy for the rest of us to use in the least invasive way possible, and giving students free education, which means they then spend the money they get in the local communities. Blue sky investment for researchers, so new ideas like the internet, for example, can be developed by researchers just as a side product of their own innovation ideas, and welfare, and that to me. And health and welfare, those are the areas. And you need the government to be spending to a stage where it's creating money relative to the rate of growth of the economy. Because I've always got to put this now on the constraint of what's going to happen with climate change, where we're going to go into reverse. But that's what I'd like to see when we don't have that particular that absolute constraint of what we're doing to the environment. Then those are the principles I'd like to see guiding government spending.
Right. Well, look, now we have abolished opportunity cost. I'm a bit of a loss now as to what I do, because do I have a cup of coffee? Do I make this desk that's downstairs waiting to be made, or do I go and have a long lie down? Now you've abolished opportunity cost. I don't have to put a rationale behind all that. I can just go and have a lie down.
I haven't freed you from the local level. It makes sense until I go like our individual times. Those tough shit. You can't get yourself out of this conversation. Damn
it. Okay. Yeah. I'm still working on that argument against why we should get someone to mow the lawn. All right. There you go. Good to talk, Steve. See you soon. And have a good Christmas.
Bye-bye. Thank you. You too.
And I hope you have a good Christmas too. We're going to miss next week. We're going to be off celebrating somewhere, but we are back the week between Christmas and New Year, when we are going to continue actually breaking down neoclassic concepts, the other fallacies of neoclassic economics, some of Steve's favourite ones, or some of the worst ones, really. We'll be doing that the week before New Year. So join us for that. I'm Phil Dobbie. I'll see you again soon. Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, then please share it with your friends, like it on YouTube, and subscribe to this channel.